Hello and welcome. Let's start here today by talking about the pharynx, and let's continue along from the second part of digestive. So here when we go through and we talk pharynx, we can see the pharynx is going to be basically your throat. It's your throat. And the pharynx is a musculo-membranous cavity. Here in this picture, we can appreciate that pharynx in greater detail. So right back in here, we can see is going to be the pharynx. So again, it's a musculo-membranous cavity that's going to be found located behind the nasal cavity, behind the oral cavity, and behind, you can see the larynx. So dorsal to the nasal cavity, the oral cavity, and the larynx. Also communicating with them, so it is communicating with each of those cavities, the nasal cavity, the oral cavity, and the larynx. Along with those cavities, it also is going to be communicating with then the esophagus below. So you could say the inferior continuation of the pharynx is going to be the esophagus. Now here when we go through and we talk functions, let's talk functions of this pharynx here. Now when we talk about the function of the pharynx, you'll see the function is going to be that it is going to behave as a passageway. It's going to function as a passageway for food and air. It will serve as a passageway for food and air, routing both of them to their proper places. So its function is to allow for the passage of food, fluids, and air. This pharynx is going to get divided up into different parts. Here in this next picture, you can actually see, I've brought this from another area, and you can see we've actually highlighted the pharynx. So here what we're going to do, since we're talking digestive, is we're going to talk about the oral pharynx and we're going to look at the laryngeal pharynx. We will leave the nasal pharynx out for respiratory system because that's going to be involved with breathing, right? Food and air are going to be basically food, air, and fluids passing through the pharynx. Air mostly through that nasal pharynx, and then food and fluids you can see right down in here. And then air obviously right down here as well. Now, here when we go through and we talk, let's talk oral pharynx. Oral pharynx is the pharynx, the division of the pharynx, dorsal to that oral cavity. Laryngeal pharynx, dorsal to the larynx. Dorsal to the larynx. Posterior, the larynx. Next, then we've got the inferior continuation of that pharynx. We said is going to be the esophagus. Now, when we talk about the esophagus is a muscular tube. It's a muscular tube. It's about 10 inches long. It's about 10 inches long, about 25 centimeters in length. It is collapsed. It's collapsed when it is not involved in propulsion. It's collapsed versus you'll see the trachea and the larynx that are just anterior to that esophagus. They're going to be basically patent. They're going to be open, and we have to maintain that open airway for breathing. Right? Esophagus is considered collapsed when it's not involved in propulsion. And this esophagus is going to run from the, you'll see from this basically just inferior to that, basically the throat area, we'll say. It'll run from that throat area into, you can see the thorax, and from the thorax it'll make its way down into the abdomen. So running all the way down to the abdomen, where it will join the stomach. It joins the stomach at the cardiac orifice. It will join the stomach at the cardiac orifice. So what is the function of the esophagus? The function of the esophagus is that it carries or it passes food. It's going to carry or it's going to pass food from the pharynx to the stomach. So it carries or it passes food from the pharynx to the stomach, and it'll do this via peristalsis. Via peristalsis. When we talk about the esophagus, then you can see peristalsis is going to be the means of propulsion here. So here we've got also the epiglottis. Now when we talk about the epiglottis, here you can appreciate that epiglottis. The epiglottis is a flexible, spoon-shaped flap. It's a flexible, spoon-shaped flap. It's composed of elastic cartilage, if you recall. It's almost entirely covered. You'll see right up in here, it's almost entirely covered with taste bud containing mucosa. And we'll talk more about it when we get to the respiratory system, because it's going to be allowing basically food to make its way to where it's supposed to go, and air then to make its way where it's supposed to go. Cardiac orifice then, let's check out. The cardiac orifice is going to be found in the abdomen. It will be found in the abdomen. Here you can see this will be that cardiac orifice right inside of here. The initial segment of the stomach is known as the cardia, and then the orifice there into there is the opening basically. So here was, when we go through, we talk about the cardiac orifice, so it's going to be found in the abdominal cavity, and this is where the esophagus will join the stomach. Where the esophagus will join the stomach. And here we will have what we call the gastroesophageal sphincter. The gastroesophageal sphincter. Now, when we talk gastroesophageal sphincter, you'll see what it is a slight thickening. It's a slight thickening of the circular smooth muscle. It's a slight thickening of the circular smooth muscle. And just like the name says, it's a sphincter. So it's going to help regulate the passage of food from that esophagus down into the stomach. And it's going to help to keep stomach contents down inside the stomach as well, not allowing the acid or basically the food to make its way up into the esophagus. So here when we go through and we talk, so cardiac sphincter or gastroesophageal sphincter, okay, or gastroesophageal sphincter. Okay, think about that, gastroesophageal, stomach and esophagus you got right inside the middle. Next then, let's look at the histology of this esophagus. When we look at the histology of this esophagus, here we're able to appreciate the different components, the different layers basically in relation to that esophagus. And we start with the mucosa and get into the submucosa, then the muscularis externa, and then we've got the adventitia. So here first we'll see it's going to contain all four basic alimentary canal layers. Now, first is the mucosa. When we talk mucosa, the mucosa we're going to find here is going to be non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Right? Non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. We've been discussing that since the beginning of the semester. Then we talk submucosa. So here you can see, again, we said non-keratinized, right? Keratin, you, again, should remember why we need it here, there versus here, why it's not needed. Okay, so non-keratinized, and then stratified squamous, you know it's protective and yada, yada, yada. And again, you can see all of that right inside of here, nice and beautifully. All right inside of there. Look at all the thick layers. Stratum basale right down inside of here, and then you moved up and basically make your way up, all the way up, all the way up, all the way up, all the way up, then to the corneum. You can see that nicely all the way around. So here you can see it's collapsed. Okay, it's collapsed. It's if it was actually involved in propulsion, you would see all of these layers here would be basically pushed in then. And this would be opened up, widened out a bit more. So after then the mucosa, we can appreciate what we call the submucosa. Now right down inside of here, this is all submucosa. Now we talk submucosa. So submucosa, beneath the mucosa. Now submucosa is made up of areolar connective tissue, number one. Areolar connective tissue. And the submucosa is going to contain, you'll see your mucus secreting glands. The submucosa will contain mucus secreting esophageal glands. The food bolus as it passes through. As the food bolus passes through, the food bolus is going to compress these glands. And when it compresses these glands are going to secrete mucus. And that mucus is going to help to, you can think, lubricate or grease that esophagus or the esophageal walls, allowing then that food bolus to make its way down. And that mucosa, submucosa. Third, then muscularis externa. Now, muscularis externa, here when we talk muscularis externa, first thing I'd like you to know is when we talk muscular layer here, normally speaking, we've seen smooth muscle everywhere. Here you're going to see you have skeletal muscle in the superior 1/3 of the esophagus. Skeletal muscle in the superior 1/3. Smooth muscle in the inferior 1/3. So skeletal in the upper 1/3. smooth in the inferior 1/3, and the middle 1/3, a mixture of the two then. It's kind of phasing out of one and into the other. So skeletal muscle in the superior third, mixture of skeletal and smooth in the middle third, and then entirely smooth muscle in the inferior third. And then muscular layer, longitudinal and circular layers, as we have seen there. And here you can appreciate those layers very, very nicely. Right? Right inside of here you can see the circular layer. All the fibers are running in a circular fashion versus the longitudinal. It's marked here too. Next then we've got the adventitia. So instead of serosa, we've got here adventitia. Adventitia is fibrous adventitia. It's composed entirely of connective tissue. Fibrous connective tissue. Composed entirely of fibrous connective tissue. Let's move then down to the stomach. Next then we move down to the stomach. When we talk stomach, so here you can see the food bolus is going to make its way from that oral cavity into the pharynx. Now here when it makes its way into the pharynx, you can see that's a one time we stop breathing. If we do start breathing or if we start talking, right, that opens up this passageway, and that's going to cause then these components to make their way down the wrong tube, we say, right? And that's literally what's happening there. We're not supposed to have any of those food contents here. So if they do happen to make their way into here, this causes us to start coughing, and that coughing is us expelling air. So that expulsion of air is going to make its way up into here and help to remove whatever contents are going to be up in this area here. Next in here, let's move through then. Here you can see the food bolus then make its way down into the esophagus. Now here you have also an upper esophageal sphincter you have to know about. So here, that upper esophageal sphincter is shut. Now when this food bolus is going to be passed into that pharynx, here you can see that sphincter will relax, and then this epiglottis is going to help to close off that entrance into the larynx, while this larynx also does the same by rising. So here you could see then the food bolus has no other way to pass, because up here you got the uvula, and then you got that soft palate helping to block off that entrance up into the nasopharynx. So that's the only one pathway it could go, and that's also because that upper esophageal sphincter is relaxed, because if it doesn't relax, then that food bolus is going to struggle to make its way down. So here, once the food bolus does pass down, then you see it's going to contract. Now you have to know about the pathology that you have here in relation to this upper esophageal sphincter not opening properly. This usually happens in the after the 6th, 7th decade of life, and then this leads to that food bolus and food accumulation to start to take place within, you'll see this area here, leading to like a little pouch and halitosis and these other different signs and symptoms then that the patient will complain of. And signs obviously that you'll be able to see, and symptoms that they'll complain of. So here then, once the food bolus passes down and makes its way through the esophagus, passing through, when it makes its way to the lower half of the esophagus, here then you can see the gastroesophageal sphincter is going to relax. When it relaxes, that's going to allow the food bolus to make its way down. And then we talked about this peristalsis as the pathway that this food bolus is going to use to make its way down, right? The contraction and relaxation of these muscles, okay? So here you're able to see, we're going to see we've got these muscles. So the circular layer will be doing its basically contraction, while the longitudinal layer, it's kind of doing its contraction. So you have this circular and an upward, downward kind of fashion happening, and this is all going to be, again, helping to move this food forward. So once that food bolus makes its way into the stomach, then this sphincter is going to contract, not allowing the contents to make their way up. And once this food bolus makes its way down, you can see here it contracts as well. So here you can see it all in greater detail. So let's talk stomach. When we talk stomach, the stomach is going to be found below the esophagus. The stomach is going to be the GI tract component that's expanded. It's the GI tract component that's actually expanded, because the rest of the GI tract, if you recall, when I talked to you about the alimentary canal, you saw from that esophagus down, it was just basically a slender tube. Even the small intestine, a slender tube. So this is the one part of it where it actually widens out, you see. And then it goes back to being that small size. So here when we talk about the stomach is going to be about 6 to 10 inches long. It's about 6 to 10 inches long. Its function is that it's a temporary storage tank. It is a temporary storage tank. And here is where the majority of chemical breakdown is, well, I actually won't say that. We're going, because that's going to happen after this area here. Now, this is where I want to say we're going to have more chemical breakdown occur versus what we saw in the mouth, is what I'm trying to say. In the mouth, we already had some chemical breakdown take place. Okay, so we're not going to say it starts here because it started in the mouth. Right? We had a couple of enzymes that you're responsible for knowing about up there. Now, here in the stomach is where we're going to have a good amount take place, but then we're going to have way more chemical breakdown take place when this food is going to make its way into the duodenum and it comes into contact with pancreatic enzymes. So the stomach is going to be a storage tank. Its function is the temporary storage tank. And this is where chemical breakdown of proteins is going to begin. This is where chemical breakdown of proteins begins. Right? Because we saw starchy foods and we saw lipids take place inside the mouth. So here now, we're talking about breakdown of proteins begins, and also food is going to get converted here into a creamy paste that we refer to as chyme. So chyme, chyme. So here when we say that protein breakdown occurs, well, let's ponder. What do we mean by that? How are proteins being broken down here? What is it? First of all, you learned in bio, you guys even did an experiment where you guys looked at the optimal pHs for your specific enzymes that you guys were using in Bio 100 and Bio 107. And you had to see whether that enzyme that you had worked better in a acidic, a basic, or a neutral pH. So you see where we're getting to here? Acids, right? You saw extreme, basically acidic environments and high temperatures are going to cause protein breakdown to occur. But don't say that, because there's a proper term that we want to use there. What's that proper term that you want to use there? Very good. Very good. I knew you knew it. Very good. All right, so here now when we go through, so that's going to be basically one way we'll see denaturation, okay, is how protein breakdown is going to occur through the acids, but then also we're going to have a certain enzyme here as well. So this enzyme is going to act on proteins also. So a couple of different ways that proteins are going to get broken down here. So here now when we go through and we talk regions, let's go through and talk about the different regions of the stomach. So the first region of the stomach that you have to know about, I told you, is the cardia. So when we talk about the cardia is a small area. Okay, it's a small area. It surrounds the cardiac orifice. It surrounds the cardiac orifice through which food components are going to make their way in from the esophagus to the stomach. So it surrounds the small area, surrounds that cardiac orifice through which I told you before, food enters the stomach from that esophagus. Next then we've got the fundus. The fundus is going to be the dome-shaped part. It's the dome-shaped region. It's a dome-shaped part. It's the part that's tucked beneath the diaphragm. It's the part that is tucked beneath the diaphragm. It bulges superiorly. You can see there, it bulges superiorly. It bulges superiorly in comparison to, or you can say lateral from the cardia. It bulges superiorly, just lateral to that cardia. Next up, we've got the body. And we've got the body. The body is basically the mid portion. It's a mid portion. Leads us to the pyloric region. Leads us to the pyloric region. Here we can see the pyloric region. The pyloric region is this funnel-shaped region. Now the pyloric region gets divided up into, first you can see the pyloric antrum. The pyloric antrum is the wider, more superior part, or the more superior division of this pyloric region. Next then we've got the pyloric canal. So the pyloric canal you can appreciate now right inside of here. The pyloric canal then is the narrower part right after the antrum. The narrower part right after the antrum. Here you can appreciate the beautiful rugae, these longitudinal folds we're going to talk about. And then the last region here is going to be the pylorus, the end part, the pylorus. At this pylorus, you can appreciate this pyloric sphincter. The pyloric sphincter now is not going to regulate the passage of food into the stomach as we saw up here, but it regulates the passage of food out of the stomach and into this small intestine, the duodenum. This pyloric sphincter can also have a pathology to it, and this pathology usually affects the first male-born child to the female, and it's a genetic predisposition there. And here what happens is it causes this sphincter to basically to block off that passageway. It usually happens, affects the baby boy in the first month or second month of life. First month, I believe, the second month of life are more common times. And the surgeon will go in then, and obviously doctor will have to come in, take a history and physical, and confirm the diagnosis. And then surgeon will come in and basically snip out some pieces, and it goes back to basically working perfectly fine, no problems. And it's called hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. It's one of the names, so make sure you get all the different names figured out there as well. So another pathology here with the upper esophageal sphincter, the lower esophageal sphincter, right? Gastroesophageal reflux disease, okay? Where we have food contents and these components making their way up into that esophagus. So you've got a pathology, different pathologies with every single one of these sphincters that you're going to be responsible for knowing about as well. Next in here, we've got pyloric sphincter, pyloric valve, okay? So now let's talk about mesenteries in relation to the stomach. Let's talk mesenteries. Here you've got basically peritonia. We've talked about peritonia there. Now, different types of peritonia we have are mesenteries we're going to see here. We're going to check out mesenteries. We're also going to look at, you'll see greater and lesser omenta, mesocolon as well. So here in relation to the stomach, we're going to look at what's known as greater and lesser omenta. So here we can see we've got lesser omenta, and then here we can appreciate greater omenta. Now, greater omenta, lesser omenta, you can see here running from the stomach and to the stomach. So here first let's talk about lesser omenta. First let me tell you what these mesenteries are doing. These mesenteries, what they're doing is they're going to help tether the stomach to other digestive organs. They're going to help tether the stomach to other digestive organs. So lesser omenta, you can see there, is going to be running. It runs from the liver, makes its way from the liver, and it's going to come down to the lesser curvature of the stomach. The lesser curvature of the stomach. So here when we're looking at the different parts of the stomach, right here you can appreciate the lesser curvature of the stomach, and here we can appreciate the greater curvature of the stomach. It's got a couple of curves, major curves to it. Lesser and greater curvature. So you can appreciate now lesser omenta running from the liver, making its way down to, we described the lesser curvature, where it becomes continuous with the visceral peritoneum of the stomach, where it'll become continuous with that visceral peritoneum. And then here we can appreciate that greater omenta. Now this greater omenta is going to run from the greater curvature. It's going to drape inferiorly. It drapes inferiorly to cover the coils of that small intestine, as you can see there. And then what it's going to do is it's going to make a U-turn. It's going to run now. Let's go over to this picture here. You can see it drapes inferiorly to cover the coils of the small intestine, makes a U-turn. So it's going to run dorsally and superiorly. It runs dorsally and superiorly up to blending in with, eventually, you can see that transverse mesocolon, to blend in with that transverse mesocolon. So it's going to drape inferiorly to cover the coils of the small intestine, then it runs dorsally and superiorly, wrapping the spleen and the transverse portion of that large intestine before blending in with the mesocolon, that transverse mesocolon. You can come back here and you can see it's riddled with fat. riddled with fat, and it contains large collections of lymph nodes. You can see it here as well. A nice drawing of it. And in the cats, what you're going to do is you're going to remove this off the cats. Not now, obviously, you guys aren't doing them. These are for future students as well. So here, what you'll do is you're going to remove this greater omentum off very nicely because it's going to end up being tucked underneath and coiled, basically all in between the different coils of that small intestine. So you can't tear it. But those of you who are going to be dissecting, looking at this, you've got to take it out very nicely and very gently. We want to see this. You don't want to tear it out because that could be a possible exam question. And then this one can also be another possible exam question. So greater omenta, lesser omenta. Next in here, we're going to be able to appreciate the histology of the stomach. Let's talk about the histology of the stomach. So when we talk histology of the stomach, here we're going to be able to appreciate now basically these different parts. Now, here we can see we've got mucosa. When we talk mucosa, mucosa here is simple columnar epithelium. And the simple columnar epithelium is composed entirely of mucus cells. Here, when we go through and we talk, we saw the rugae I told you about before. The rugae are going to be longitudinal folds. They're longitudinal folds of the mucosa and submucosa. Longitudinal, large longitudinal folds composed of mucosa and submucosa. Then we have gastric pits. When we talk about gastric pits, these gastric pits, they're going to be found as basically little openings to the glands. And there's going to be millions of these gastric pits in quantity. So tiny openings that lead to the glands. When we talk gastric glands, here we're able to appreciate now in specific detail the pit. And then here you've got the gland component. When we talk about the gastric glands are tubular. They're tubular and they produce the stomach secretions that are called gastric juice. They produce stomach secretions that are called gastric juice. Now, when we look at these glands, they're made up of various types of cells. Now, the first type of cell that you have here are going to be your parietal cells. You can see you've got mucous neck cells, parietal cells, and we're going to also be able to appreciate, you can see in here, chief cells. So they're all found in different areas you're responsible for knowing about as well. Now, when we talk about the parietal cells are going to be found in the middle region. They're found in the middle region of the gland, and they're scattered amongst the chief cells. They are scattered amongst the chief cells, and they will simultaneously secrete hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. They will simultaneously secrete hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. Now, the chief cells are going to occur mainly in the basal regions. So you can see them here mainly in the basal regions, right, of the gastric glands, and they're going to produce pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is going to be the inactive form of the protein digesting enzyme called pepsin. And then also you can appreciate here enteroendocrine cells. I want you to go through and do a little research on those. So mucous neck cells producing mucus, parietal cells I mentioned there to you guys, chief cells, and then get those enteroendocrine cells down as well. And then we'll move down into the submucosa. So moving back, here you can appreciate now the submucosa. Now between the submucosa and the, basically you can see the upper part of that mucosa, you've got now this muscularis mucosae in there as well. This is a local layer of muscle there. And it'll allow for local movements of that small, basically of that small area of the stomach. So right in here you can see the muscularis mucosae. So local movements basically right in that area. Next then, submucosa. We talk submucosa. Submucosa contains your submucosal plexus. It contains your submucosal plexus. Then here we have the muscularis externa. When we talk muscularis externa, the muscularis externa is going to be made up of 3 layers here versus the 2 that we had before we've seen typically to everything. So the extra layer that you're going to have here is the oblique layer. The oblique layer. Also, you're going to find here the myenteric plexus. The myenteric plexus is going to be found here as well. And then we move down to the serosa. When we talk serosa, then serosa is going to be the deepest part. So here you can appreciate then the serosa. Next, then we have what we call the mucosal barrier in relation to the stomach. The mucosal barrier now is going to be made up of three components that I'd like you to know about. Now, basically, this mucosal barrier is going to be providing protection to the stomach's wall. Now, here when we go through and we talk about this mucosal barrier, the components making up the mucosal barrier are going to be, number one, that the stomach is going to contain a thick coating of bicarbonate. Thick coating of bicarbonate rich mucus. So stomach is going to contain a thick coating of bicarbonate rich mucus. And that's going to help to battle the acidity that's going to be in there. Also the epithelial cells. The epithelial cells are going to have tight junctions in between each other. And this won't allow anything to seep through. Tight junctions. And then number three, you'll see the damaged cells. When these damaged cells are damaged, they get shed and they're replaced. So these three components of the mucosal barrier are going to help us to combat that acidic environment inside the stomach. Let's move then, and let's move down, and we'll move down then to the small intestine. Now when we move down to the small intestine, okay, we'll check out the various components there. So here let's focus on the gland, and the gland then here you can appreciate those various cells. So make sure you have down exactly which one is doing what. You'll be responsible for all their functions. And then here we talked about the three components of the mucosal barrier that help the stomach from being self-digested. So let's talk then small intestine. So here the small intestine is highlighted. First component you can see there. Second component we've got right down in here, and then here we've got the third component. So when we go through, we talk about the small intestine. We'll check out the small intestine and the associated organs. So when we talk small intestine, the small intestine is going to be the body's major digestive organ. It's the body's major digestive organ. Now here I'd like you to know that it's going to extend, and it's going to extend from that pyloric sphincter all the way down to the ileocecal valve. All the way down to the ileocecal valve. The function of the small intestine is number one, absorption. Absorption. Here we'll see where this is where our food, the main function is going to be basically absorption, where food is going to make its way from this the lumen all the way into the blood. And also we're going to see digestion. Mechanical digestion already occurred. Chemical digestion is what we're going to see here. So functions include absorption and digestion. You have to have digestion obviously first in order to have absorption. So digestion then, which is going to be, we said, chemical. Now when we talk regions, so duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. All three different divisions. Duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. And then here you can see duodenum is about 10 inches. Jejunum, anywhere from 1 to 1.7 meters. And then ileum, you can see anywhere from 1.6 to 2.7 meters. So here when we go through and we talk about the different divisions, the duodenum is the first part. The duodenum is immovable. It curves around the head of the pancreas. We saw that there. It's about 10 inches long as we described. Here in relation to this duodenum, we're going to be able to appreciate, so here you can see everything in order. So we are right down inside of here. Here's that pancreas. Okay? So here now, what we can appreciate is the hepatopancreatic ampulla. This hepatopancreatic ampulla is a bulb-like point. It's a bulb-like point that opens into the duodenum. And it contains, you can see, the bile duct. It contains the bile duct. And it contains the main pancreatic duct. So they're both going to allow secretions from these two organs and this organ to make their way into that small intestine, into the duodenum. So here when we go through and we talk next segment, the next segment then is going to be jejunum. So right here is where the jejunum picks up from. So coming back here, you can see then the jejunum. Now the jejunum is going to be about 8 feet long, and it extends from the duodenum to the ileum. So it's a part of the small intestine after the duodenum, extends from the duodenum to the ileum. Ileum then is about 12 feet in length. The ileum joins that large intestine now. It's going to join the large intestine right here at the ileocecal valve. Ileocecal valve, the next valve that you'll have to know about. So let's look at the histology. The histology is highly adapted for nutrient absorption. It's highly adapted for nutrient absorption. So when we talk about now the histology, you'll see here we've got mucosa, and the mucosa, you've got epithelium. The epithelium is simple columnar absorptive cells. Simple columnar absorptive cells. Now when we talk about the mucosa, we're going to be able to appreciate here circular folds. The circular folds are going to be these deep, permanent folds of the mucosa and the submucosa. Also appreciated here are villi. You can see the villi. And these villi are going to be finger-like projections of the mucosa. They're usually over a millimeter in height. Usually about over a millimeter in height. And in relation to the villi, we've got what we call lacteals. You can appreciate the lacteals. The lacteals, they're going to be these wide lymph capillaries. They're wide lymph capillaries. And they're going to be responsible for absorbing fats. Next then we have our intestinal crypts. The intestinal crypts, they're also known as the crypts of Lieberkühn. Also known as the crypts of Lieberkühn. They're basically tubular glands. They are tubular glands that are found on the mucosa. So tubular glands found on the mucosa between the villi. In between the villi. Also appreciated here are going to be microvilli. So we'll zoom in on one aspect of the villi. And here we can appreciate microvilli. When we talk about microvilli, microvilli are going to be exceptionally long. They're densely packed and forming the brush border. They contain certain brush border enzymes. Then we move down to the submucosa. Now when we move down into the submucosa, you can appreciate now in the submucosa, first it's typical areolar connective tissue. It is typical areolar connective tissue. And here you can appreciate now the lymphoid follicles. We're going to find here lymphoid follicles. We're going to find here also certain glands, depending again on which part of that small intestine we're at. So if we're in the duodenum, we're going to find duodenal glands. Here you can see a nice example of a duodenal gland, aka Brunner's glands, aka Brunner's glands, and they produce an alkaline, bicarbonate-rich mucus. They produce an alkaline or a bicarbonate-rich mucus, and what that does is it's going to help to neutralize that chyme that's coming, that highly acidic chyme that's coming from the stomach. So duodenal glands, Brunner's glands. And then we have Peyer's patches. Peyer's patches, they're also called aggregated lymphoid follicles. Also called aggregated lymphoid follicles. And they're going to be found in an increased abundance towards the end of the small intestine. So lymphoid follicles increase in abundance towards the end of the small intestine because we're going to have a huge amount of bacteria that has to be prevented from entering the bloodstream there. And that's what, again, these the lymphoid tissue and these lymphoid follicles are going to help to do. And then moving back out, you're going to be able to appreciate then, we can see the muscularis. Muscularis is going to be typical bilayered. So circular layer, longitudinal layer. Typical bilayered. And then we can appreciate the serosa. The serosa is going to be the visceral peritoneum. Visceral peritoneum. Next, then we can move over to the liver. We move over to the liver, then the liver is going to be an accessory organ. So we've basically, now we're stopping off from that small intestine, moving to the accessory organs, and we'll come back and we'll take care of that large intestine, right? Instead of just going from the small intestine right to the large intestine. So we'll take care of these organs which are found right near here. So we'll get these here taken care of, and then we'll take care of the rest of that GI tract. So the accessory organs, first, the liver. We talk about the liver. The liver is going to be associated with the small intestine. Its function, it has many metabolic and regulatory roles. I want you to go through and read all about that liver and get a thorough understanding of what that liver does. It's a very important organ. And I'll tell you here just a couple of quick functions here. But again, you need to go through and read it and understand it fully. Here you'll see it has a lot of metabolic and regulatory roles. That's what I want you to understand. Also, it's going to produce bile. It will produce bile for export to the duodenum. What else it's going to do is it's going to filter. It's going to filter and it's going to process nutrient-rich blood that gets delivered to it. It's kind of like customs. When we come in, they want to check your baggage. That's what this is going to do. Whatever comes into our body, okay, if it gets basically absorbed through the digestive tract, metabolism, first pass metabolism is going to be through the liver. You'll learn more about that when you get to pharmacology. So here, in case you want to bypass that route, we give IV then. Okay? And then another source of delivering medication is going to be inhalation. So we've got a lot of different methods of getting things in. So here when we talk liver, it's going to filter and process nutrient-rich blood that gets delivered to it. The liver is going to get divided up. It's going to get divided up into 4 different lobes. The first 2 main lobes you can appreciate right off the bat are going to be the right lobe. The right lobe is the largest lobe. It's visible from all different sides of that liver's view. And then here you can see the left lobe of the liver. It's smaller in size compared to the right lobe. And the two are separated from each other. We're going to see thanks to this falciform ligament. But before we check that out, let's talk about the posterior aspect where we are able to appreciate the next 2 lobes. So here you're able to appreciate the caudate lobe and the quadrate lobe. Caudate lobe and quadrate lobe, much smaller in size. Caudate, superior, quadrate on the inferior aspect, right next to the gallbladder. Now going back to the anterior aspect, you can see the falciform ligament. It's a mesentery. It separates the right and the left lobes anteriorly, and it suspends. It's going to suspend that liver. It's going to suspend the liver from the diaphragm, which is going to be right above it, and the anterior abdominal wall. And the anterior abdominal wall. Then here you can see the continuation of that falciform ligament is going to be the round ligament or the ligamentum teres. The round ligament or ligamentum teres is a fibrous remnant of the fetal umbilical vein. So I want you to go through, read about that, and make sure you understand that there as well. Because then you have to put it together when it comes to heart. So I'm telling you, fetal umbilical vein remnant. So I want you to go through and read about it and see what it's going to be doing. You could be asked that there as well. Very important during our embryonic development. Right when we breathe, we take our first breath, everything switches off. And basically when we're born, pressure changes and we take our first breath, right? A lot of changes take place. So next then we have the common hepatic duct. So let's do this. Let's look at this in better detail. So let's see here. Here we can see now we've got first our common hepatic duct. The common hepatic duct, I'd like you to know, is a large duct. It's a large duct that's going to be formed from several hepatic bile ducts, basically, through which bile is going to pass and make its way out of the liver. So here you can see these right and left hepatic ducts. And they're going to come together, and when they come together, they're all going to give rise to this common hepatic duct. The common hepatic duct then collects all the bile from all these various components, these various ducts that are all allowing the bile to make its way out, and this bile is going to accumulate into the common hepatic duct. The common hepatic duct then, you can see, is going to join, it'll blend with that cystic duct, and they're going to give rise to this bile duct. So it travels downward towards the duodenum. The common hepatic duct does. It fuses with the cystic duct that's draining the gallbladder to give rise to the bile duct. Then the bile duct is going to take all the bile and dump it off into the duodenum. Let's look at the histology here in relation to then our liver. So here when we look at the histology in relation to our liver, here we're able to appreciate basically the lobules. So here we can see the lobules. What we'll do is we'll move over to this view here. In this view here, we're able to appreciate now the lobules in greater detail. And here what we'll do is we'll zoom in onto one lobule, and we can appreciate that one lobule in full-on great detail. Here we could zoom in on that then in even greater detail and have a full idea of what is happening. So here when we look at the lobules, these lobules are actually sesame seed sized structural and functional units of the liver. They're hexagonal in shape. You can see that there. And what they are made up of, they consist of basically plates of liver cells. And you can see that right in here. Stacks or plates of liver cells. And then you can see space in between. Liver cells, space. Liver cells, space. Liver cells, space. Liver cells, space. So you got that pattern all running through. So liver cells are hepatocytes. Hepatocytes, your liver cells. And you can see they are organized like bricks. And then here we can appreciate the central vein. Central vein is found at the center of each of these lobules. Then the central vein runs in the longitudinal axis of the lobule. This vein is going to collect basically blood, and it's going to drain this blood then. It's going to drain this blood, you can see, to the hepatic vein. To the hepatic vein. Then you have your portal triads. You can see here on the corners of the hexagonal lobules, you can appreciate basically these triads. So here are the triads when we talk. Here we've got basically your portal triads. These triads are going to be presenting with three basic structures. And these three basic structures are going to include, number one, a branch of the hepatic artery. When we talk about the hepatic artery, it's going to be responsible for bringing in oxygen-rich blood. And that oxygen-rich blood is going to be used by all these hepatocytes so they can perform their functions. Then you're going to see, you can appreciate here, the branch of the hepatic portal vein. A branch of the hepatic portal vein. Now, these veins, what they do is they're bringing in that nutrient-rich blood from the digestive tract. They bring this nutrient-rich blood in from the digestive tract, so we said that the liver can process it. And here is how then those hepatocytes are going to come into contact with it so they could do what they need to do. They're kind of like you can think customs department. Right? They need to inspect everything that comes into the body. Okay, these hepatocytes. So what's going to help bring everything in is going to be this pathway. The hepatic portal circulation we're going to see. So next in here we're going to be able to appreciate the bile duct. The bile duct then is going to be responsible for removing bile that gets made inside the liver. And so you can see here the blood we've talked about is going to be passing through this way. Bile is going to be moving in the opposite direction. Moving in the opposite direction. So here you can appreciate your sinusoids. These sinusoids, they're all basically enlarged, leaky plates you can think of. They are enlarged, leaky plates in between the hepatocyte plates. And within these cells, you can appreciate these Kupffer cells, your hepatic macrophages, or your stellate cells, whatever you want to call them. Same name for basically the same for this cell. They are basically spider-shaped hepatic macrophages. spider-shaped hepatic macrophages, and they form part of the sinusoidal walls. Then here we can appreciate the gallbladder. When we talk about the gallbladder, you can see a nice view of that gallbladder right inside of here. The gallbladder is a thin-walled, green, muscular sac, about 4 inches long. Its function is that it stores bile. It's going to store bile that's not immediately necessary for digestion. This bile gets concentrated here. So it concentrates the bile by absorbing some of its water and ions. So whenever digestion is not occurring, this hepatopancreatic ampulla and the sphincter are going to be basically shut. The bile gets produced by the liver. The bile is going to keep coming. The bile is going to keep getting produced because the liver's not going to stop producing it. So it keeps getting produced, it keeps getting produced, it keeps getting produced, and keeps getting produced, it keeps stacking up, keeps stacking up, keeps stacking up. And then where is it going to go? It's going to start filling up into here. And that's how you're going to see your gallbladder is going to get filled with bile. And then the bile is going to just keep filling up, keep filling up, keep filling up, and then it'll get used. And then we'll empty it out, and then we start refilling again. How are we going to empty it out? We're going to get into that into physiology. You're going to see there's a hormone called CCK, cholecystokinin, that's going to come in. It's going to cause gallbladder contractions to occur. While it causes gallbladder contractions to occur, it's going to cause other events to occur as well. So when you see gastrointestinal physiology, there's going to be a lot of hormones you're going to have to understand, and basically all these different events that are going to be taking place in the different organs at the same exact time. We're phenomenal. We're awesome. Our bodies are engineered very, very beautifully. So let's move then. We took care of the cystic duct. We've already seen that. Nothing there draining the gallbladder. Let's move to the pancreas then. So here you can appreciate this beautiful pancreas. I told you have to know annular pancreas there as well. So here when we talk pancreas, soft tadpole-shaped gland, mixed gland we talked about, extends across the abdomen. Extends across the abdomen, abutting the spleen. They say the tail tickles the spleen, basically. So the pancreas is encircled by the C-shaped duodenum of the small intestine. Most of this organ is retroperitoneal. It's going to be found located behind the peritoneum. Since it's retroperitoneal, if it elicits pain, it's going to elicit pain to the back. These patients, if they have pancreatic pain, they'll complain of back pain. And people will write them off as saying, oh, maybe they're here for pain meds. And you've got to work them up. You've got to find out what's going on, unless they actually have history. But you got to check it out and find out what the problem is, especially with somebody coming in complaining of back pain. So you got to really work it up to see what you have going in there. So most of it's retroperitoneal. Right? It's going to be lying deep to the greater curvature of the stomach. It'll be found lying deep to the greater curvature of the stomach because the stomach's greater curvature is going to be around about here. And the esophagus and the lesser curvature will be like about here. The next function, it's an accessory digestive organ. It produces enzymes. We're talking digestive now. We already did endocrine, so you got to know that already. It breaks down all categories of food stuff that are going to get delivered to the duodenum. So when you talk function, enzymes are going to behave like biological scissors. They're biological scissors. They go and chop up everything. So endocrine and exocrine. Endocrine, we've talked about glucose and we've talked about insulin, glucagon and insulin, so make sure you've got that down there. Here you're going to see amylase, lipase, and so forth. So various enzymes such as these different ACEs. Now here you can see the main pancreatic duct. The main pancreatic duct you can see is going to be centrally located. It is centrally located. And this main pancreatic duct is going to drain pancreatic juice. It'll drain pancreatic juice from that pancreas right into, you can see, along with bile, into that small intestine. So it fuses with the bile duct just as it enters into the duodenum. And here you can see the accessory pancreatic duct. This accessory pancreatic duct is going to empty just proximal. It'll empty directly into the duodenum, proximal to the main duct. Proximal to the main duct. So let's throw this pancreas under the microscope. Here we can appreciate the acini. So here we can see acinar cells. These acinar cells are within the pancreas. They're clusters of secretory cells. Basically, these acini are clusters of secretory cells, acinar cells. And these acinar cells are going to be found surrounding these ducts. Found surrounding these ducts. And they contain zymogen granules. They contain zymogen granules. These zymogen granules you can appreciate right inside of here are going to be containing digestive enzymes called zymogen, which they will manufacture. So here you can see then into the ducts, because this is the exocrine component. The secretions are going to make their way into this duodenum. And inside the duodenum, we've got inactive enzymes that will eventually become active. And a lot of these enzymes you can see here, okay, they're inactive enzymes that are going to be coming from the pancreas. These inactive enzymes, what they do is they're going to come in here, they're going to activate further enzymes and assist basically with the rest of digestion. So here when we go through and we talk acini, we've got main pancreatic duct, okay, so here we can see then we're going to have amylase, okay, lipases, okay, and other enzymes I want you to go through and know about coming from the pancreas. So I want you to go through and get the rest of these enzymes down from the pancreas as well. So to make physiology much easier for you, you already know them from anatomy, and all you have to do is learn and see how they're going to actually function when you get to physio. Next, then let's move to the large intestine. Let's talk large intestine. So we talk large intestine, a couple of good views here, beginning and the end, or basically the whole thing, and then you can see the beginning in here very nicely, and then the end you can see here nicely. Let's see here, same thing we can see when we talk large intestine. It frames the small intestine on three sides. Large intestine extends from the ileocecal valve to the anus. Extends from the ileocecal valve to the anus. The function of the large intestine is to absorb most of the remaining water. It's to absorb most of the remaining water and form indigestible, its function is to absorb remaining water from any indigestible food residues. To absorb remaining water from these indigestible food residues. It's also going to store. It's going to store these residues temporarily and then eliminate them from the body in the form of feces. Another function, large intestine is going to synthesize K and B vitamins. Regions, let's go through the different regions of the large intestine. So the first region we have is going to be the cecum. The cecum is the sac-like initial segment of the large intestine. It's found lying below the ileocecal valve. We're able to appreciate the vermiform appendix. The vermiform appendix shooting off of that cecum. And it's a blind, worm-like structure that plays a role, we believe, in body immunity. You had Peyer's patches here, and then here you can see this here. So it's all there to help benefit the massive quantity of bacteria that's going to be found in this area here. Next then is the colon. The colon is going to have several distinct regions we're going to go through and we're going to check out. So we talk about the colon. The colon, you can see here first the ascending colon. Ascending colon travels up the right side of the abdominal cavity. towards the level of the right kidney. Towards the level of the right kidney. And then here you can see it'll turn, and as we turn, we encounter the right colic flexure, the hepatic flexure. This right colic flexure is this basically right angle turn. It's a right angle turn from the ascending to the transverse colon. Transverse colon, name transverse colon because it's going to be found running transverse. It travels transverse across the abdomen. Becoming then the left colic flexure, which leads us to the descending colon. So left colic flexure, or the hepatic flexure, is going to be the area where the transverse becomes the descending. The descending runs down the left side of the abdomen, where the ascending was running up the right side, this is all getting too much. So the ascending we saw running up the right side of the abdomen, the descending running down the left side of the abdomen. Running down the left side of the abdomen. So from the transverse, left colic flexure, okay, splenic flexure, down to the descending colon, which runs down the left side of the abdomen, which then becomes sigmoid. Sigmoid, anything S-shaped, sigmoid. So sigmoid colon, leading us to the rectum, which then leads us to the anal canal. S-shaped inferior part of the descending colon. This is where that colon enters into the pelvis then. This is where the colon enters into the pelvis. The rectum is in the pelvis. It's in the pelvis at the level of the third sacral vertebra. At the level of the third sacral vertebra. Inside of there we can appreciate the rectal valves. So let's look at these rectal valves. So here then we're able to appreciate those rectal valves. Oh. Let's see these rectal valves right inside of here. You can see here's one, here's another, and here's a third. So we talk rectal valves, there's three. They're lateral curves or bends. And they're represented internally as transverse folds. They're represented internally as transverse folds. And what they do is they allow us to pass fecal material, or they're going to allow us to pass gas without passing fecal material. They will allow us to pass gas without passing fecal material. So moving back to the outside, right inside of here. The rectum then leads us to the anal canal, the last segment of the large intestine. It's about 3 centimeters long, so it's very small. It's about 3 centimeters long. And inside here, you're going to be able to appreciate the anal sphincters, internal anal sphincter. Okay, we can see here, and then the external anal sphincter there as well. And then here we've got the anus. The anus is going to be the opening to the body's exterior. Then moving back out, we can appreciate these other structures. Other structures you can appreciate here are going to include, number one, tinea coli. You can see the tinea coli. Tinea coli, it's going to be basically bands of smooth muscle. They're bands of smooth muscle. You can see found on both sides of that intestine. And what this does, it helps to kind of create this nice tight, taut over that large intestine. And when it creates that nice tight taut over the large intestine, you can see what it creates is it creates these haustra, these puckerings, these pocket-like sacs. So these pocket-like sacs are caused by the tone of that tinea coli. And then we can appreciate here these epiploic appendages. These epiploic appendages. What they are, they're basically small fat-filled pouches. They're small fat-filled pouches of visceral peritonia that's going to hang from the surface of the large intestine. And then here we've got mesentery in relation to the large intestine, but here let's talk mesentery we can see in relation to the small intestine as well. So coming back here, you're able to appreciate mesentery in relation to the small intestine. All tethering again, keeping everything tethered to the back wall. So large intestine, we can appreciate here. Okay, we saw greater omenta, transverse mesocolon I mentioned to you guys there. And then here we're going to be able to see also sigmoid mesocolon. So transverse mesocolon and then sigmoid mesocolon basically you can see all in here. All mesentery right inside of here as well. So transverse mesocolon surrounding the transverse colon. All up in here. Sigmoid all around the sigmoid colon. And I also want to mention to you bacterial flora inside of this large intestine. In the large intestine, we have bacterial flora. That's bacteria that's found in the GI. And what they do is they colonize the colon, the bacteria does. And what it does, it metabolizes some host-derived molecules. They'll metabolize some host-derived molecules and ferment some of the indigestible carbohydrates. The bacteria is going to help synthesize B-complex vitamins and vitamin K.